door opened at my parents' house and I forgot how to breathe. I had expected a frightened woman in a borrowed dress. I had expected embarrassment, maybe awkward laughter, maybe a reminder that a man should never make foolish offers on the side of a road after nearly ruining someone's life. But she stood there calm as Sunday morning. Her dark coat was buttoned neatly, her hair was pulled back. Her face held no anger, no pleading, no nervousness. Beside her stood an older man in a charcoal suit, tall, silver-haired, with eyes that had seen enough of the world to judge it quietly. My mother gasped behind me. My father's hand tightened around his walking cane. And the woman I had hit with my car less than 2 hours earlier looked straight at me and said, "Mr. Whitaker, I told you I wouldn't come alone." That was the moment I understood the worst mistakes in life are not always loud. Sometimes they arrive wearing dignity. But before that door opened, I was just a tired, wealthy man running late to dinner. My name is Thomas Whitaker. At the time, I was 59 years old enough to know better and proud enough to ignore what I knew. I owned a regional commercial real estate firm in Northern Virginia, nothing glamorous like people imagine from the outside, but enough shopping centers, office buildings, and warehouse leases to keep my name on brass plaques and my face in charity programs. People called me successful. I accepted the word because I did not know what else to call myself. My wife Ellen had been gone for 6 years. Cancer took her slowly, and regret took whatever was left of me afterward. Our 2 grown children lived their own lives in Colorado and North Carolina. They called on birthdays, sent pictures of grandchildren, and spoke to me with the careful politeness people use when they have stopped expecting warmth. Every month, my parents invited me to dinner at their house in McLean. My mother still set the table with linen napkins and silver that had to be polished by hand. My father, 84, and still convinced every problem in America began when men stopped wearing ties to dinner, would ask about business taxes, politics, and whether I had found someone respectable. Respectable was one of his favorite words. That evening, I was late. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving the roads shiny beneath the streetlights. I was driving my black Mercedes, checking the time, annoyed at traffic near a strip of small businesses my company had bought the previous spring. The property was old, half vacant, and scheduled for renovation. I had barely looked at it in person. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. My mother. I glanced down just long enough to see her name. That was all it took. A shape moved near the curb. A woman in a yellow safety vest bent to pick something up from the roadside. I slammed the brake, but the car slid just enough to clip her hip. She fell hard onto the wet pavement, her bucket rolling into the gutter. For one terrible second, everything went silent. Then I was out of the car, my knees stiff, my heart beating in my throat. Ma'am, don't move. I'm calling 911. She pushed herself onto one elbow. I'm all right. You are not all right, I snapped, more from fear than anger. You were just hit by a car. She looked at me calm, despite the rainwater soaking one sleeve of her gray work shirt. She was younger than me, maybe early 40s, though there was a steadiness in her face that made age hard to guess. Not glamorous, not plain either, just real in a way I was not used to noticing. I said, I'm all right, she repeated. I called anyway. The dispatcher told me to keep her still until the paramedics arrived. A couple from the laundromat came out and stood nearby, whispering. The woman's bucket lay on its side, filled with broken glass, cigarette butts, and muddy leaves. Only then did I notice the name stitched on her vest, Harbor Janitorial Services. My property manager had hired that company to clean the common areas until demolition began. I own this property, I said, as if that explained something. She gave me a dry look. Then maybe you should tell someone the lights by the curb don't work. That struck harder than it should have. The ambulance arrived. The paramedics checked her carefully. No broken bones, they thought. Bruising, maybe a sprained wrist. They still wanted her examined at urgent care. I insisted on paying. I'll cover the medical bills, I said. Lost wages too, whatever you need. She sat on the bumper of the ambulance, a blanket around her shoulders. I don't need a payoff. It's not a payoff. It sounds like one. I pulled out my wallet, then stopped because even I could see how ugly that looked. A rich man standing in the rain trying to turn guilt into a transaction. What do you need then, I asked. She looked toward the dark storefronts behind me. A decent job. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because I did not know how to answer something so direct. A job? Yes. What kind? One where people don't act like I'm invisible until they almost run me over. Her words landed cleanly, no shouting, no drama, just truth. I should have apologized properly right then. I should have given her my card, asked for her name, and followed through like a decent man. Instead, I did what men like me sometimes do when shame makes us uncomfortable. I made a joke. My parents are waiting for me at dinner, I said. They've spent 6 years trying to marry me off to every widow in 3 counties. You want a job? Come with me and pretend to be my fiancée for one evening. That might be the hardest work available tonight. The paramedic stared at me. The woman stared at me too. The second the words left my mouth, I regretted them. I'm sorry, I said quickly. That was inappropriate. But she did not look offended. She looked interested, which somehow made it worse. What's the job? She asked. I frowned. The job. You asked me to pretend. That's work, isn't it? I rubbed my forehead, rain dripping from my hairline. I wasn't serious. You said you needed help. I said something foolish. That happens. For the first time, there was the faintest hint of amusement in her eyes. The paramedic finished wrapping her wrist. Ma'am, you still need to get checked. I will, she said. Then to me, what time is dinner? I should have stopped it. Any reasonable man would have. 7:30, I said. Address him. I gave it before I could think better of it. Then she said the sentence that should have warned me. I'll come, but I won't come alone. I assumed she meant a friend, maybe someone for safety, maybe a sister. Honestly, I did not think about it much. I was too busy feeling relieved that she was alive and not screaming, suing, or lying broken under my front bumper. What's your name? I asked. Clara, she said. Clara Bennett. I handed her my business card. Thomas Whitaker. She glanced at the card, then at the building behind me. Yes, she said softly. I know. Something about the way she said it made me uneasy. But my phone buzzed again. My mother. The ambulance lights flashed red across the wet pavement. The whole scene had become too embarrassing to stand in any longer. I'll make this right, I told Clara. She looked up at me from beneath the blanket. Then start by seeing people before you hit them. I had no answer. I drove to my parents' house with damp cuffs, shaking hands, and the foolish belief that I was still in control of the evening. I did not know Clara Bennett had already seen through me. I did not know the man she would bring to dinner had every reason to remember my family name. And I certainly did not know that by the time that front door opened, the woman I had mistaken for a janitor would begin taking apart the quiet arrogance I had spent a lifetime building. I stood there for a moment after closing my car door, staring at my parents' house like it might offer me some kind of answer. It never did. The Whitaker house had been the same for 40 years. White brick, black shutters, trimmed hedges that my father still insisted on inspecting himself even now. Order, control, appearances. That was what the house stood for. That was what I stood for too, or at least what I had convinced myself of. I checked my reflection in the car window. My shirt was damp at the cuffs. My hair, thinner than it used to be, was still slightly out of place from the rain. I smoothed it back, straightened my jacket, and told myself to get through dinner like I always did. Simple, predictable, safe. Except tonight I had invited a stranger I'd hit with my car to pretend to be my fiancée. And she had said yes. Worse, she had said she wouldn't come alone. I should have called her, canceled, sent money anyway, apologized properly, ended it before it could begin. But I didn't. Because a part of me, the part I didn't like to examine, was curious. And another part, if I'm honest, was tired of being the man who always played things safe. I walked up the stone path and rang the bell even though I had a key. My mother liked formality. It made her feel like things were still the way they used to be. She opened the door before the second chime. Thomas, she said, her voice already carrying that gentle edge of disappointment. You're late. I know. She stepped aside, letting me in. The smell of roast beef and rosemary filled the air. It hit me with something close to memory. Ellen in the kitchen years ago, laughing at something I didn't hear because I was reading emails at the table. That kind of memory doesn't shout. It settles quietly in your chest and refuses to leave. My father sat in the living room, his cane propped beside his chair, the evening news playing low on the television. You're late, he said without looking at me. I've noticed, I replied. He muted the television and turned his attention fully to me, which was always worse. What happened? I hesitated just long enough for him to notice. Traffic, I said. He gave a small dismissive nod. Excuses are the currency of the unprepared. My mother sighed softly. Frank, please, not tonight. Every night is the same night, he said. That's the problem. I loosened my tie. Good to see you too. We moved into the dining room. The table was set perfectly, china plates, folded linen napkins. the silverware aligned like soldiers. My mother had even lit candles, though it wasn't a holiday. "Sit," she said. "Dinner's almost ready." I took my usual seat, the one Ellen used to sit beside me in. That empty space had long since stopped surprising me, but it never stopped meaning something. My mother poured wine. My father watched me, and I realized I couldn't get through dinner pretending nothing had happened. "There's something I should tell you," I said. That got their attention. My mother paused mid-pour. "What is it?" "I'm not alone tonight." My father leaned back slightly, meaning, "I invited someone to dinner." Silence. Not the comfortable kind. My mother set the bottle down slowly. "Someone." "Yes." She looked at me carefully, the way she used to when I came home late in high school. "A woman." "Yes." My father's eyebrows lifted just enough to signal interest. "Well, that's unexpected." "She'll be here soon." My mother sat down across from me. "Thomas, why didn't you tell us earlier?" "Because I didn't plan it earlier." That part at least was true. My father tapped the table lightly with his fingers. "Who is she?" I opened my mouth and closed it again. How do you explain something like that without sounding like exactly the kind of man you don't want to be? "She works for one of my properties," I said finally. "What does she do?" my mother asked. I hesitated. "She's part of a cleaning crew." That changed the air in the room immediately. My father's expression tightened, not anger exactly, but something close to disapproval. "A cleaning crew," he repeated. "She's a janitor, Thomas," my mother asked carefully. "Yes." My father exhaled slowly. "And you thought it appropriate to bring her here?" "I thought it was my decision." "That's not the point." "It is to me." My mother reached for her napkin, folding and unfolding it in her hands. "We're not judging her, dear. We're just surprised." "Yes," my father added. "Surprised that a man in your position would make such a spontaneous choice." There it was. Position. Always position. I felt something tighten in my chest, something I usually kept buried under years of practiced composure. "You wanted me to meet someone," I said. "I met someone." "That's not what we meant," my father said. "I know what you meant." Silence again. Then my mother said softly, "What's her name?" "Clara." "And you care about her?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. Did I? I had known her for less than an hour. I had hit her with my car. I had made a joke that should never have been made, and now she was coming to dinner. "I respect her," I said. That was the closest thing to truth I could offer. My father studied me for a long moment. "Respect is a beginning," he said, "but it is not enough." I almost laughed at that. Respect had been absent from most of my life's important relationships. It would have been a miracle to start there. My mother stood. "Well, she said smoothing her skirt will welcome her properly. That's what matters." I nodded, grateful for her attempt at grace. But underneath it, I could feel the tension building. Not just in the room, in me. Because the more I thought about Clara, the way she had looked at me, the way she had refused money, the way she had said she wouldn't come alone, the more I realized something wasn't right. People don't behave that way unless they have something solid underneath them. Something I hadn't taken the time to see. I checked my watch. 7:26 p.m. 4 minutes. My father poured himself more wine. "I assume she understands the nature of this evening," he said. "What nature is that?" I asked. He met my eyes. "That she is entering a family with standards." I held his gaze. "She's entering a house for dinner." "For you, perhaps," he said. "For us, it is more than that." I didn't answer. Because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't entirely sure what I had brought into this house, or whether I had any right to it. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. 7:29 p.m. My mother moved toward the front hallway, adjusting a vase that didn't need adjusting. My father remained seated, composed, waiting. And I stood there in the middle of the room, a man who had spent his life believing he understood how things worked, only to realize in the span of one rainy evening that I might not understand people at all. The doorbell rang. No one spoke. I walked to the door, each step heavier than the last. For the first time that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not annoyance. Not control. Not even guilt. Uncertainty. I reached for the handle. And as my hand closed around it, I remembered her words. "I won't come alone." I opened the door. And everything I thought I was managing quietly began to fall apart. Clara Bennett stood on my parents' front porch as if she had been expected all along. That was the first thing that struck me. Not her clothes, though they were nothing like what I had imagined. Not expensive exactly, but chosen with care. A dark wool coat, a cream blouse, simple pearl earrings, black shoes polished clean despite the wet pavement outside. She had not dressed to impress. She had dressed to be taken seriously. Beside her stood the older man. He was tall, lean, and still in a way powerful men often are when they no longer need to prove it. His silver hair was combed back neatly. His charcoal suit looked conservative, almost old-fashioned but perfectly fitted. In one hand he held a folded black umbrella, in the other he held a worn leather folder. His eyes moved from me to the hallway behind me, then back to my face. "Mr. Whitaker," Clara said. "This is my father, Edward Bennett." I swallowed. "Good evening." Edward Bennett extended his hand. His grip was firm, dry, and measured. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, "I appreciate you inviting my daughter." There was nothing accusing in his tone. That made it worse. Behind me, my mother had stepped into the hallway. I heard the small breath she took when she saw them. My father, slower because of his cane, appeared near the dining room entrance and stopped. For a moment, nobody knew what version of the evening we were supposed to perform. Then my mother recovered first. "Please," she said with the graceful manners she had spent a lifetime polishing. "Come in out of the cold." Clara stepped inside. Her father followed. I closed the door and the sound felt final. My mother smiled warmly, though her eyes were searching. "I'm Margaret Whitaker." "Clara Bennett," Clara said, shaking her hand. "Thank you for having me. And this is my husband, Frank." My father gave a slight nod. "Mr. Bennett, Mr. Whitaker." They shook hands. I watched my father closely. He had a gift for placing people. A watch, a pair of shoes, a word choice, a posture. He collected all of it within seconds and turned it into judgment. But with Edward Bennett, something different happened. My father hesitated, not visibly to everyone perhaps, but I knew him. He recognized something. "Have we met?" my father asked. Edward's expression did not change. "I believe we have been in the same room once or twice." My father's grip tightened on his cane. My mother, sensing danger without knowing its name, said, "Dinner is ready. Please come sit." We moved into the dining room. It is strange what embarrassment makes you notice. The shine of silverware, the sound of chair legs against hardwood, the small watermark on my sleeve. Clara's wrist still wrapped lightly from the paramedic's bandage. The way Edward pulled out her chair before sitting beside her. My mother placed Clara across from me. Edward sat beside her. My father took his place at the head of the table as always. For a few minutes we pretended. My mother asked Clara if she was comfortable. Clara thanked her. My father asked Edward if he lived nearby. "Alexandria," Edward said. "Retired?" my father asked. "Yes." "From what line of work?" Edward picked up his water glass. "The law." My father's eyes sharpened. "Attorney." "For a time." Clara glanced at her father, then at me. I had the uneasy feeling of being the only man at the table who did not understand the room. My mother began serving roast beef, carrots, potatoes, and green beans from the good platters. I normally found comfort in that old routine. That night, every movement felt staged. "So Clara," my mother said carefully, "Thomas tells us you work at one of his properties." Clara looked at me. Not angrily, just directly. "I do," she said. "What kind of work do you do?" "I clean the common areas for harbor janitorial services. Mostly evenings. Trash sidewalks, windows when needed." My father lowered his fork. "That must be difficult work." "It is honest work," Clara replied. A flush crept up my neck. My father gave a small nod as if he approved of the answer, but not the circumstance. "And before that," he asked. Clara paused. I saw in that tiny pause a door she had not decided whether to open. "I worked in operations for a healthcare nonprofit," she said. "Before that, program management. Before that, graduate school." My mother blinked. "Graduate school?" "Public administration." "Where?" my father asked. "Georgetown." The fork in my hand felt suddenly heavy. My mother looked from Clara to me, and I could read her thought clearly. "You brought a janitor to dinner and did not know she went to Georgetown." "No, mother," I thought. I hit her with my car first. Edward Bennett folded his napkin once across his lap. "Clara has always believed a person should know the work behind the policy." "That's admirable," my mother said. "It is inconvenient," Edward replied, and Clara smiled faintly. It was the first real smile I had seen from her. Something about it softened her whole face. For one brief second, I saw the woman beneath the accident, beneath the odd arrangement, beneath my assumptions. Then my father spoke. Thomas did not tell us much about how you two met. My stomach tightened. Clara did not look away. No, she said. I imagine he didn't. My mother's hand stilled. Edward set down his glass. My father looked at me. Thomas, there are moments in a life when you can still choose who you are going to be. I wish I could tell you I chose well immediately. I did not. It was an unusual meeting, I said. Clara waited. My father's eyes narrowed. Unusual how? I took a breath. There was an accident. My mother turned pale. An accident. I clipped her with my car, I said quietly. The words sat in the air like smoke. My father leaned back. You what? She's all right, I said too quickly. The paramedics checked her. I offered medical care compensation. I refused, Clara said. My father stared at me as if I had become a stranger at his own table. My mother whispered, Thomas. I looked down at my plate. Roast beef untouched. Green beans perfectly aligned. That was when Edward Bennett finally spoke in a voice low enough that everyone leaned in to hear it. My daughter called me after the paramedics left, he said. She told me a man had hit her because he was distracted. She also told me he was more embarrassed than cruel. I looked up. Edward's eyes rested on me. I came tonight to decide whether she was right. No one moved. Clara's face remained composed, but I saw the slightest tension near her jaw. My father cleared his throat. Mr. Bennett, I assure you. Edward raised one hand, not rudely but firmly. I am not here for assurances, Mr. Whitaker. My father stopped. That alone was remarkable. Edward turned to me. My daughter also said you asked her to pretend to be your fiancée. My mother closed her eyes briefly. My father's face went hard. I felt smaller than I had felt in years. It was a stupid joke, I said. Was it? Edward asked. I looked at Clara. She did not rescue me. Good for her. No, I admitted, not entirely. The room became very quiet. Edward leaned back slightly. Then perhaps you can help me understand. I tried to speak, but no clean explanation came. Only ugly little pieces of truth. I was lonely. I was tired of disappointing my parents. I was used to solving discomfort with money. I had seen Clara in a yellow vest and decided in some lazy corner of my mind that she could be used as a shield for one evening. None of that sounded like a man worth defending, so I said the only thing I could. I was ashamed, I said, and I tried to turn it into something I could control. Clara's eyes softened, but only a little. Edward watched me for a long moment. Then he asked the question that changed the rest of my life. Mr. Whitaker, he said, when you looked at my daughter on that roadside, did you see a woman or did you see a problem? My father looked away. My mother put one hand over her mouth. And I, Thomas Whitaker, who had spent nearly 60 years building an answer for everything, found I had none. There are questions a man spends his whole life avoiding. Edward Bennett had just asked me one of them. When you looked at my daughter, did you see a woman or a problem? The room held its breath. I could feel my father's disappointment without looking at him. My mother sat very still, her hand still near her mouth. Clara watched me not with anger, not even with expectation, just patience. That made it harder, because patience leaves you no place to hide. I lowered my eyes to the table for a moment, not out of shame alone, but because I needed a second to separate the truth from the habits I had built over decades. I began, then stopped. What had I seen? A liability, an inconvenience, a complication to be resolved quickly so I could get to dinner on time. I looked up again. I saw a problem, I said. No one spoke. Edward did not nod or react. Clara did not look surprised. My father shifted in his chair, uncomfortable in a way I had rarely seen. Thomas, that's not. It is, I said quietly. I wasn't raising my voice. I didn't need to. Because for once, I wasn't arguing. I was admitting. I didn't ask her name at first, I continued. I didn't ask what she needed. I asked how to fix it, quickly, quietly, efficiently. My mother's eyes filled slightly. She reached for her napkin. Edward folded his hands on the table. And when she refused your money, I didn't understand it. Why? Because money is how I've solved things for a long time. That was the cleanest sentence I had spoken all evening. My father exhaled slowly, as if something in that answer unsettled him more than he expected. Clara finally spoke. You didn't just misunderstand me, she said. You dismissed me. Her voice wasn't sharp. It didn't need to be. I know, I said. She tilted her head slightly. Do you? Yes. How no. I took a breath. Because I've done it before, I said. That surprised even me. The words hadn't been planned. They had simply arrived. With employees, I continued. With tenants, sometimes with my own family. My mother looked down at her plate. My father said nothing. I leaned back slightly, feeling something shift inside me, not breaking exactly, but loosening. I've spent years looking at people in terms of outcomes, I said. What they can do, what they cost, what they solve. Edward's eyes remained steady on mine. And what do you think that has cost you? I almost smiled at that. More than I realized. Silence settled over the table again, but this time it wasn't tense. It was reflective. My mother finally spoke, her voice softer than before. Clara, you said you worked in operations before. Healthcare, wasn't it? Clara nodded, yes. Why did you leave? Clara rested her hands lightly on the edge of the table, because I stopped recognizing the work. What do you mean, my mother asked. We were supposed to help people, Clara said, but over time it became more about numbers, reports, funding cycles. We talked about patients like they were categories instead of people. Edward added quietly, she resigned rather than sign off on a program she believed would harm more than help. My father looked up. That must have been difficult. It was necessary, Clara said. I studied her. The calmness I had noticed earlier wasn't passive. It was chosen, built. You chose to take a janitorial job after that, I asked. Yes. Why? Because I wanted to remember what work feels like when it's honest. I frowned slightly. You think other work isn't honest? I think it's easy to forget who you're working for, she said. That landed. Not as an accusation, as a mirror. Edward leaned back in his chair. There is a difference, Mr. Whitaker, between managing outcomes and understanding people. I'm starting to see that, I said. My father cleared his throat. Well, in business, outcomes matter. They do, Edward agreed. But when outcomes become the only measure, people become invisible. The word hung there. Invisible. Clara had used it earlier, standing in the rain. One where people don't act like I'm invisible. I felt a quiet pressure in my chest. I didn't see you, I said to her. She met my eyes. No. I saw the vest, the job, the situation, and I made a decision based on that. Yes. And when you asked for a job, you thought I was trying to get something from you, she said. I thought you were being practical. And when you asked me to pretend, I looked down again just for a second. I thought I could turn an uncomfortable situation into something useful. For you, she said. Yes. There it was. Plain, unprotected. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Clara said something I did not expect. At least you're honest about it now. I looked up. That doesn't fix it, she added, but it's a place to start. My mother let out a small breath as if she had been holding it all evening. My father shifted again, his grip on the cane loosening slightly. Edward nodded once. Truth is rarely comfortable, but it is necessary. We returned to dinner slowly after that, not to avoid the conversation, but to let it settle. My mother asked Clara about Georgetown. Clara answered. My father asked Edward about his years in law. Edward spoke carefully, revealing little but enough to show depth. And I sat there listening more than I had in years. Really listening. Not waiting to respond. Not calculating. Just hearing. At one point, my mother said Thomas has always been very capable. Clara glanced at me. I can see that. But sometimes, my mother added gently, he forgets to slow down. Clara gave a small nod. That happens. I almost smiled. Because for the first time that night, I didn't feel like I was being judged. I felt like I was being understood. And strangely, that felt heavier. After a while, the plates were cleared. The candles had burned lower. The room felt warmer, less formal. But something important had already happened. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just a quiet shift in how I saw the people sitting across from me. And how I saw myself. As Clara stood to leave, she adjusted the light bandage on her wrist. Thank you for dinner, she said. My mother stood quickly. It was our pleasure. My father nodded. Miss Bennett. Edward rose beside his daughter. I stood as well. Clara, I said. She paused. Yes or no one? I owe you an apology. She studied me for a moment. For hitting you, she asked. For more than that, I said. She considered it. Then she said quietly, "You're starting to understand why." And that I realized was the beginning of something I hadn't expected when I got behind the wheel that night. Not redemption, not yet, but recognition. People think change comes in loud moments. It doesn't. It comes quietly like a shift in how you listen. After Clara said you're starting to understand why something settled inside me, not relief, not forgiveness, just awareness. We didn't end dinner right away. My mother insisted on coffee. That in our house was how difficult evenings softened into something manageable. We moved into the living room. The fire had already been lit. My mother always prepared for it this time of year. The glow of it changed everything. The room that had felt stiff and watchful now felt human. Clara sat on the edge of the sofa, at first careful, composed. Edward took the armchair across from my father. I stood for a moment, unsure where to place myself. Then Clara said almost casually, "You can sit, Mr. Whitaker. I'm not going to disappear." It was a small thing, but it broke the tension. I sat. My mother brought in coffee on a tray along with a plate of small butter cookies she had baked earlier that afternoon. She always baked too much. It was her way of caring without asking. "Sugar?" she asked Clara. "Just a little, thank you." "Cream?" "Yes." The normalcy of it felt almost unreal after everything that had been said. My father cleared his throat. "Miss Bennett, Clara," he corrected himself, which I noticed immediately. "You mentioned earlier, you left your previous work because of disagreements." Clara nodded. "That's one way to put it." "What happened?" he asked. Edward glanced at his daughter, giving her the choice. Clara took a sip of her coffee before answering. "We were running a regional program," she said. "Funding was tight. The board wanted to shift resources to areas that looked better on reports." My father frowned slightly. "That's standard." "On paper," Clara said. "But it meant cutting support from smaller communities that didn't produce impressive numbers." "And you disagreed," he said. "I did." "Did it cost you your position?" "I resigned." My father studied her for a moment. "That's not a common choice." "No," she said, "it isn't." He leaned back slightly. "Most people would have stayed, tried to work within the system." "I did," Clara said, "for a while. And then she set her cup down carefully. "And then I realized I was becoming someone I didn't respect." The room went still again, but not uncomfortably. "Just honestly." My mother spoke next, her voice gentle. "That must have been very difficult." "It was," Clara said, "but staying would have been harder." Edward added quietly, "Integrity often costs more in the short term." My father nodded slowly. I watched him closely. Something in him had shifted too, not completely, but enough to matter. "And the janitorial work?" he asked. Clara smiled faintly. "Temporary. For perspective. For grounding," she said. "It's easy to make decisions about people when you're far removed from their daily lives." I felt that one. Not as a criticism, as a truth I had never bothered to test. My mother leaned forward slightly. "And has it helped?" "Yes," Clara said, "more than I expected." "How?" she asked. Clara thought for a moment. "It reminded me that dignity doesn't come from titles," she said. "It comes from how you treat people and how you let them treat you." My mother's eyes softened. My father looked at the fire. And I sat there feeling like I had spent most of my life measuring the wrong things. Edward turned to me then. "And you, Mr. Whitaker?" I blinked. "Me. What has your work taught you about people?" I almost gave my usual answer, something about markets growth stability. But none of that felt right anymore. "Efficiency," I said finally. Edward raised an eyebrow. "And what else?" "In his 40s, I hesitated. "Distance," I admitted. Clara glanced at me. "Distance can feel safe," she said. "It does," I replied. "But it also makes it easy to stop seeing people clearly." I nodded. "I'm starting to understand that." My mother placed her cup down. "Thomas has always been very focused," she said. "On outcomes," Clara added gently. "Yes," my mother said, "but not always on the people behind them." There was no accusation in her voice. Just recognition. "That might have been harder." My father shifted in his chair. "Success requires discipline," he said. "It does," Edward agreed. "But discipline without empathy can become something else." My father didn't respond immediately. Then he said, "I suppose that depends on what you value." "It always does," Edward said. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the rain had stopped. For a moment, no one spoke. And for the first time that evening, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt full. Eventually, Clara stood. "We should go," she said. My mother stood as well, already. "It's been a long day." That was an understatement. Edward rose beside her. My father pushed himself up slowly with his cane. I stood too. We moved toward the front door together. My mother wrapped Clara in a brief, warm embrace, something she rarely did with new people. "Thank you for coming," she said. Clara smiled. "Thank you for having me." My father extended his hand to Edward again. "Mr. Bennett," he said. "Mr. Whitaker." Their handshake was firmer this time. More equal. Then Clara turned to me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I meant what I said. I told her. "I owe you more than an apology." She studied my face. "I know," she said. "I'd like to make it right." How, she asked. That was the question. Not what I would offer, but how I would change. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I'd like the chance to figure it out." She considered that. Then she said something simple. "Start by not turning it into a transaction." I nodded. "That seems fair." She adjusted her coat. "Good night, Mr. Whitaker." "Thomas," I said. She paused. "Good night, Thomas." Edward gave me one last look, not unfriendly, not approving either. Just measured. Then they stepped out into the night. I stood in the doorway longer than necessary, watching their car pull away. Behind me, my mother said quietly, "She's remarkable." "Yes," I said. My father added, "And you underestimated her." "Yes." He tapped his cane lightly against the floor. "You do that more than you think." I closed the door slowly. "I know," I said. And for the first time in a long while, I meant it. Because that dinner hadn't just changed how I saw Clara Bennett. It had changed how I saw the quiet habits that had shaped my entire life. And I wasn't sure I could go back to not seeing them. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. No alarm, no urgent meeting, no reason that would have made sense to the man I had been just a day before. But something had shifted. The house felt different, not physically, but in the way silence sits with you when your mind refuses to go back to sleep. I stood in the kitchen staring at the coffee machine longer than necessary, replaying the evening in pieces. Clara's voice, Edward's question, my father's silence. And the part that stayed with me the most? Start by not turning it into a transaction. That line followed me into the office. I arrived before most of the staff, something I hadn't done in years. My assistant looked surprised when I walked past her desk with a simple "good morning" instead of my usual quick nod and a list of instructions. Inside my office, the view was the same glass steel, a clean stretch of highway cutting through the city, but it didn't feel the same. I sat down, opened my laptop, and pulled up the file for the property where I had hit Clara. Harbor Janitorial Services. I clicked through the contract. Temporary, low-cost, minimal oversight. Exactly the kind of arrangement I preferred. Efficient. Distant. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then picked up the phone. "Call Harbor Janitorial," I told my assistant. "I want to speak with whoever manages their local crews." There was a pause. "Is there a problem?" "Yes," I said, "but not the kind you think." While I waited, I found myself looking at the schedule for the week. Meetings, approvals, numbers. Everything neatly arranged, everything predictable. For years, that had been enough. Now it felt incomplete. The call connected. "This is Daniel Reyes, Operations Manager," a voice said. "Mr. Reyes, this is Thomas Whitaker. I own the Ridgeview property." "Yes, sir. Is there an issue with the service?" "There is," I said, "but I'd like to discuss it in person." Another pause. "Of course. And I'd also like to speak with one of your employees, Clara Bennett." There was a longer pause this time. "I can arrange that," he said carefully. "Thank you." I hung up and sat back. This wasn't a solution. It wasn't even a plan. It was just a step. That afternoon, I drove back to the same property. In daylight, it looked worse than I remembered. Faded signage, cracked pavement, a place waiting to be turned into something more profitable. Or something more considered. Clara was there. Same vest, same steady posture, same quiet focus as she worked along the sidewalk. For a moment, I stayed in the car. Not because I didn't want to face her, because I wasn't sure how to do it differently. Then I stepped out. She noticed me before I spoke. "You're not hitting anything today, are you?" she asked without looking up. No, I said, I'm walking. That earned a small smile. Good start. Daniel Reyes approached from the building entrance, introducing himself. We spoke briefly about contracts, lighting, safety, things I should have cared about long before. Then he excused himself, leaving Clara and me alone. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I meant what I said last night, I told her. I know, she said. I don't want to fix this with money. Good. I want to do it properly. She leaned on her broom, slightly studying me. What does that mean to you, she asked. I hesitated. Better working conditions, proper lighting, safer equipment, a review of the contract. She nodded slowly. That's a start. And I added I'd like to offer you a position. Her expression didn't change. What kind of position? Operations. Something closer to what you were doing before? Real responsibility. She was quiet for a long moment. And why me, she asked. Because you're qualified. That's not the whole answer. No, I admitted, it isn't. She waited. Because I trust your judgment, I said, and I need someone who sees what I've been missing. She crossed her arms lightly. And what have you been missing? People, I said. That seemed to land. But she didn't accept right away. I won't be a project, she said. You won't be. I won't be there to make you feel better about yourself. I know. And I won't accept anything that compromises what I walked away from before. I wouldn't ask you to. She studied me carefully. Then she said, I'll think about it. That was more than I expected. Over the next few weeks, things changed slowly. Not dramatically. Not perfectly. But noticeably. Clara accepted the position with conditions. Clear ones. Respect, transparency, independence. And she kept them. At work, she was direct, thoughtful, and unwilling to let things slide just because they had always been done that way. At first, it unsettled people, including me. But over time, it became something else. Valuable. We didn't rush anything beyond that. No sudden friendship, no forced closeness. Just conversations. Real ones. Sometimes about work, sometimes about nothing important at all. I found myself listening more, interrupting less. Noticing things I had ignored for years, how people spoke when they felt heard, how small changes affected entire teams, how dignity showed up in quiet ways. At home, things shifted too. I called my son without checking the time first. I asked my daughter about her life and listened to the full answer. I visited my parents without waiting for an invitation. My father still had his opinions. My mother still set the table with the same care. But something in me had changed the way I sat at that table. One evening, a few weeks later, Clara and I stayed late at the office reviewing a proposal. You're different, she said suddenly. I looked up, in a good way. She considered it. In a real way. I leaned back in my chair. That's new. Yes, she said, it is. I nodded. I didn't realize how much I was managing instead of living. That happens, she said. You seem to say that a lot. Because it does. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then she added, you're not the man I met on the roadside anymore. I let that settle. Good, I said. Yes, she replied, good. And for the first time since that night, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not relief, not pride, something quieter, something steadier. Like I was finally beginning to understand the difference between fixing a problem and becoming someone better because of it. About a month after that night, I found myself standing in the same hallway, hand resting on the same brass doorknob. Only this time, I wasn't afraid of what might be standing on the other side. Thomas, my mother, called from the kitchen. They'll be here any minute. I know, I said. My father sat in his usual chair, though he had traded the evening news for a book he wasn't really reading. He glanced at me over his glasses. You invited them, he said. Try not to interrogate them this time. I almost smiled. I'll do my best. He nodded once. Good. That was as close to approval as my father had ever come without saying the word. The house felt different. Not because anything had changed in the furniture or the walls, but because I had. I wasn't hosting a performance tonight. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I had invited Clara and her father back because I wanted them there. Nothing more complicated than that. The doorbell rang. My mother paused mid-step, then looked at me. Well, she said. I walked to the door slower this time, not hesitant, just present. When I opened it, Clara stood there again. No vest this time. No pretense either. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back, the same way her expression calm but warmer than before. Edward stood beside her as composed as ever. "Good evening, Thomas," Clara said. "Good evening," I replied. "I'm glad you came." Edward extended his hand. "Thank you for inviting us. Thank you for accepting." We shook hands, and this time there was no weight behind it. No test. Just acknowledgement. They stepped inside. My mother greeted them warmly, embracing Clara again, which Clara returned more naturally this time. "Dinner's ready," my mother said. "Of course it is," Clara replied with a small smile. We moved into the dining room and I noticed something almost immediately. There was no tension, no careful watching, no unspoken questions hanging in the air. Just four people sitting down together. And me. Dinner was quieter than the first time, but in a good way. We talked about ordinary things. Work, weather, my father's opinions about city planning, my mother's garden, Edward's stories from his years in law, told not to impress, but to share. Clara spoke about the changes she had been making at the office. Not dramatic ones, but meaningful. Better lighting in older properties. Clearer communication with staff. Simple policies that treated people like they mattered. I listened. Not because I was trying to prove anything, because I wanted to understand. At one point, my father said, "You've made quite an impression at the firm." Clara glanced at me before answering. "I've made adjustments," she said. My father nodded. "Thomas speaks highly of your work." That caught me off guard. I hadn't realized he noticed. "Thank you," Clara said. Later over coffee, Edward turned to me. "You've been busy," he said. "I have. And not just with business. Number." He studied me for a moment. Then he said, "Change is rarely comfortable." "It hasn't been," I admitted. "But it seems to suit you." I thought about that. "I think it's overdue." Clara watched the exchange quietly. After a while, my mother stood and began clearing cups. "I'll help," Clara said, rising with her. They moved into the kitchen together, leaving my father, Edward, and me in the living room. My father leaned forward slightly. "You handled things poorly that night," he said. "I know. But you handled what came after. Better than I expected." That surprised me. "Thank you," I said. He nodded once. Edward added, "What matters is not the mistake, Mr. Whitaker. It is what you choose to learn from it." "I'm still learning," I said. "Good," he replied. "That means you're still paying attention." We sat in comfortable silence after that. Not forced. Not careful. Just quiet. When Clara returned, she glanced at me. "Walk me out," she asked. Of course. We stepped outside together. The night air was cool, clear. Very different from the rain-soaked evening when we had first met. For a moment, we stood on the porch without speaking. Then I said, "I owe you something." She smiled slightly. "You've already said that." "I don't mean money." "I know." I took a breath. "I owe you the truth." She waited. "I didn't just change because I felt guilty," I said. "I changed because I realized I didn't like who I had become." She nodded slowly. "That's a harder realization." "Yes." "And what do you plan to do with it?" "Keep going," I said. "Keep paying attention. Keep choosing differently." She studied my face as she had done the first night, but this time there was something softer in her expression. "That's all anyone can really do," she said. I hesitated. Then I asked, "Would you consider dinner again sometime?" She tilted her head slightly. "This wasn't dinner." I smiled. "You know what I mean." She thought for a moment. "Maybe," she said, "as long as it's not a job." "Not a job," I said. "And not a performance." "Not that either." She nodded. "Then maybe." Edward stepped out behind her. "Ready?" he asked. She turned back to me once more. "Good night, Thomas." "Good night, Clara." They walked to their car. I watched them go, not with uncertainty this time, but with something steadier. Something earned. When I went back inside, my mother was already straightening the table. My father sat quietly, his book closed. "It went well," my mother said. "Yes," I replied. My father looked at me. "You opened the right door this time." I nodded. "I think I did." Later that night, alone in my house, I stood by the window and thought about everything that had changed. Not in my business. Not in my schedule. In me. I had spent years believing success was about control. About outcomes. About staying ahead of problems. But that night on the roadside and everything that followed had taught me something I should have learned much earlier. People are not problems to solve. They are lives to understand. And sometimes the greatest thing someone can give you is the chance to see that clearly. If this story stayed with you, even in a small way, take a moment to think about the last time you truly saw someone, not for what they could do for you, but for who they are. And if you believe stories like this still matter, quiet ones, honest ones, you're always welcome to come back and sit with me again.